Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the life of Melania Trump.
Okay.
You've given us a really interesting mix of materials, excerpts from her memoir, Melania and Me, and a collection of photos spanning her life.
Right.
Our mission is to cut through the media noise and see if we can understand the woman behind the headlines a bit better.
Exactly. It's about connecting the dots between her experiences and the person she became.
I'm definitely curious to see what we discover. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with her early life in Slovenia.
Mm-hmm.
She describes a happy, creative childhood.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because Slovenia at the time was under communist rule.
Right.
It wasn't exactly the image of oppression we often associate with that system.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
She doesn't shy away from the realities of the communist system, but she focuses on her family, her parents' hard work, her mother's passion for design and fashion. She even talks about having access to things like Western music and being able to travel to Italy and Austria with her family. It challenges the idea of a completely closed-off society and suggests a more complex reality.
It's almost like a hidden chapter of history, this connection to the West that we don't often hear about.
Yeah.
Do you think having this kind of exposure early on influenced her worldview?
I think it definitely played a role. Imagine growing up seeing both the limitations of communism and the possibilities offered by the West.
Right.
It likely fostered a sense of ambition, a desire for something more.
Yeah.
And that ambition really comes through in her stories, starting with her modeling career.
Right. Her modeling journey began at 17 when a photographer approached her. She was hesitant at first, focused on her architecture studies, but eventually she won a modeling contest and her career took off.
Yeah.
It seems like opportunities just kept presenting themselves.
It's interesting how she describes it as almost accidental, not something she actively pursued at first. But once she committed to modeling, she fully embraced it, moving to Milan and Paris and working with top designers. This wasn't about fleeing hardship. It was about seeking new challenges and pushing herself further.
It sounds like she had that drive from a young age, always looking for the next level, and that eventually led her to New York City in 1996. It's almost like New York was the final boss level of her modeling career.
I like that analogy. New York represented the pinnacle of the fashion world. Her move there speaks volumes about her ambition. She was already successful, but she saw New York as the place to prove herself.
And it was in New York that she met Donald Trump at a Fashion Week party in 1998. It wasn't love at first sight, though. In fact, she mentions he was with another woman at the time.
It's a detail that challenges the narrative, often associated with their relationship.
Right.
She wasn't swept off her feet. She was selective about her time and social life. It paints a picture of a woman who was in control, not someone easily swayed.
It's definitely a different perspective than what we usually hear. So the relationship developed over time, leading to their marriage in 2005, shortly after their son Byrne was born, and in that same year, Melania became a U.S. citizen.
That's an important point. She speaks about how proud she was to become a citizen and how challenging the process was even for someone in her position. It humanizes the immigration experience in a way we don't often see. It reminds us that even for someone with wealth and influence, becoming an American citizen is a complex and demanding process.
It really makes you think about the hurdles many immigrants face. It's not always as straightforward as it seems.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about her time as First Lady.
Okay.
She took on cyberbullying with her Be Best initiative, which was interesting given her husband's own online behavior.
You're right, it was a choice that drew criticism from some. But Melania addresses this directly in her memoir, stating that she's her own person and advocates for what she believes in regardless of her husband's actions. She's not afraid to stand apart and pursue her own path. That definitely echoes her independent spirit, which we also see in her decision to visit a border detention center for children separated from their families. This was at a time when there was a lot of debate about immigration policies, and her visit was seen as controversial by some.
It was a complex situation. On the one hand, she supported stricter immigration policies. On the other, she showed empathy for the families affected by those policies. Her actions seemed to highlight the human cost of these political decisions.
It reminds us that there are always multiple sides to these issues, and that even those who support certain policies can still be moved by the personal stories of those impacted. Speaking of controversial moments, we can't ignore the "I really don't care, do you" jacket. It caused a media frenzy.
It was a bold move that sparked a lot of debate. Melania claims it was a message directed at the press, a response to the constant negativity and scrutiny she felt. But regardless of her intent, it became a symbol of the polarized political climate and the challenges of communicating through fashion in such a high-profile role.
It's a good example of how every action, every outfit can be interpreted in different ways, especially when you're in the public eye.
Exactly. And the choice of what to wear becomes even more complex when you're representing an entire nation. There's so much symbolism and messaging involved.
Now let's talk about a different aspect of her time in the White House, her renovation projects. She dedicated a lot of time and effort to restoring parts of the White House, especially the private residence.
It's clear that this was a passion project for her.
Hmm.
Her background in design and architecture really shines through in how she describes the process. She meticulously researched historical details, planned the renovations with experts, and oversaw every aspect of the project. It's a great example of how she brought her own personal interests and expertise to the role of First Lady.
It's interesting how she balanced the historical significance of the White House with her own vision for these spaces. Can you tell us a bit more about her design choices? Did they reflect any particular style or era?
She definitely leaned towards a more classic, timeless aesthetic, but with modern touches. For example, in the Rose Garden, she kept the overall layout, but updated the plantings and added some contemporary sculptures. Her goal seemed to be to honor the history of the White House while also making it feel more welcoming and personal.
It's like she was trying to create a space that felt both grand and intimate, and it makes me wonder how her vision for the White House compared to previous First Ladies. Was there anything particularly unique about her approach?
Well, each First Lady brings their own personality and style to the White House. But what stands out with Melania's is her emphasis on preserving historical accuracy. She spent a lot of time researching original documents and working with conservators to ensure that any changes she made were in keeping with the historical character of the building.
That's fascinating. It suggests a deep respect for the past and a desire to leave her own mark on history. It's almost like she was curating a museum, but one that she also had to live in.
That's a great way to put it. It's a balancing act, and one that she seems to have navigated thoughtfully.
And how does she feel about leaving the White House and returning to private life? Did she have any regrets, or was she relieved to step away from the spotlight?
In her memoir, she expresses a sense of relief at returning to a more private life. She talks about being able to focus on her family and pursue new projects without the constant scrutiny of the public eye. But she also criticizes cancel culture and expresses concern about the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago, which suggests that the political spotlight still follows her even as she tries to move on.
That makes sense. It's probably impossible to completely escape the public eye after being First Lady. It seems like those experiences, both the positive and the negative, have shaped her perspective in a profound way.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how those experiences inform her future endeavors.
Speaking of future endeavors, there's one particular aspect of her memoir that I found really surprising: her views on abortion.
Yes, this is where her personal beliefs seem to diverge from the Republican Party line.
Exactly. She argues that the phrase, "my body, my choice," applies to both sides of the debate, meaning she supports a woman's right to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy, while also acknowledging the right to choose life.
It's a nuanced and thought-provoking stance.
Yeah.
It recognizes the complexities of the issue and avoids the easy answers often presented in political discourse.
It's definitely a perspective we don't often hear, especially from someone in her position. It challenges assumptions and really makes you think.
It does. It highlights the importance of looking beyond political labels and trying to understand individual perspectives.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from her childhood in Slovenia to her modeling career, meeting Donald Trump, her time as First Lady, and even her views on some controversial issues. But we also have a collection of photos that you've brought along. How do these photos add to the story?
They provide a fascinating visual counterpoint to the memoir. We see Melania at various stages of her life, from childhood snapshots in Slovenia to glamorous modeling shots to behind-the-scenes moments as First Lady. They offer a glimpse into her world, both public and private.
I'm really curious to see how the photos complement her words. Let's dive into that in our next segment.
All right, let's start with some of the childhood photos. What struck me is how stylish she was, even as a young girl. There's one photo of her as a toddler, posing confidently in a red dress, and you can already see that sense of style developing.
I saw that one too. It's almost like she was born for the runway.
Yeah.
But there are also some heartwarming photos of her with her family, her parents, her sister, and you can sense the close bond they shared.
Yes, and you can see the resemblance to her mother, especially in their eyes and smile. It's a reminder that behind the public persona, there's a woman who cherishes her family and those personal connections.
And those early photos in Slovenia offer a glimpse into a world that's very different from the one she inhabits now. It makes you wonder how those experiences shaped her values and outlook.
Absolutely. Growing up in a communist country, even one with connections to the West, would have instilled a certain perspective on things like freedom, opportunity, and hard work.
Then there are the photos from her modeling career. Wow, she was stunning. You can see why she became so successful. Those photos capture that fierce, independent spirit we've been talking about.
There's a confidence and intensity in her gaze that jumps out at you. She's owning the camera, not letting it intimidate her. It speaks to her determination and ambition.
But there are also photos that reveal a softer side, especially the ones with her son Barron. You see a different Melania in those photos, a nurturing and playful mother.
It's a reminder that she's not just a fashion icon or a political figure, but also a woman who deeply loves her child. Those photos humanize her in a way that the public often doesn't see.
And the photos from her White House years are fascinating. The state dinners, the trips abroad, the meticulously planned events. It's like a visual diary of her time as First Lady.
It's incredible to see the scope of her role. She's meeting with world leaders representing the United States on the global stage and advocating for her initiatives. It's a level of responsibility and exposure that few people ever experience.
Those photos really bring the memoir to life. It's like having a backstage pass to history.
You're right. And what's interesting is how the photos and the memoir work together to create a more complete picture of Melania Trump.
So it's not just about what she says in the memoir, but also what the photos show us.
Exactly. They provide different layers of information, different perspectives. For example, the memoir talks about her commitment to tradition as First Lady.
Right.
But the photos showcase her modern, fashion-forward style.
I see what you mean. She's often seen wearing bold colors, sleek silhouettes, and designer pieces. It's a very contemporary approach to First Lady fashion.
Right, and she's not afraid to take risks with her fashion choices, which sometimes sparked controversy, like with the "I really don't care" jacket.
Speaking of that jacket, there's a photo of her wearing it while visiting a border detention center for children separated from their families. That image, juxtaposed with the memoir's explanation, is really thought-provoking.
It is. In the memoir, she claims the jacket was a message to the press. But regardless of her intent, it became a symbol of the complexities and sensitivities surrounding immigration policy. It shows how fashion choices, especially in such a high-profile role, can take on a life of their own.
It's like every outfit became a potential headline.
Precisely. And the photos from her trips abroad highlight the power of visual diplomacy. You can see how fashion was used to convey respect, make a statement, or even challenge expectations.
I remember the photo of her wearing a headscarf during her visit to Saudi Arabia. It was a gesture of cultural sensitivity, but it also sparked a lot of discussion about the role of women in that society.
Right, and it raised questions about how to balance respect for different cultures with the values of the United States.
And the photos of her meeting Pope Francis are striking. He looks so elegant and poised, but there's also a warmth and humanity in those photos, especially the one where they're sharing a laugh.
It was a significant moment for her as a Catholic, and the photos capture both the formality of the occasion and the genuine connection between them.
It's a good reminder that even in those highly formal settings, there's still room for human connection. Now, the photos from her trip to Africa are particularly powerful, especially the ones from her visit to the Door of No Return in Ghana, a site that marks the departure point for many slaves during the transatlantic slave trade.
Those photos convey the weight of history and the emotional impact of that experience. You can see the solemnity and reflection on her face as she visits this historic site. It's a side of her we don't often see.
It reminds us that she's not just a fashion icon or a political figure, but also a woman deeply affected by the places she visits and the stories she encounters.
Absolutely. And then there are the photos of her interacting with children during her travels, whether she's reading to them at a school in Malawi or playing soccer with them in Kenya. In those photos, you see her genuine warmth and compassion.
Those moments seem so unguarded and authentic.
They do. It's like we're seeing a different side of her, one that's not always captured in the formal portraits or the carefully staged events. It's a reminder that behind the public persona, there's a woman who cares about making a difference in the world.
You're right. It's like the photos give us access to those unscripted moments, those glimpses of her personality that might otherwise be missed.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. We're getting a multifaceted view of Melania Trump through her own words, through carefully selected photos, and through our own interpretations of those sources.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, trying to understand who she is and what her story means.
It is, and that's the beauty of the deep dive. It's not about giving you definitive answers, but rather providing you with the tools and insights to draw your own conclusions. It's a jumping-off point for further research, further reflection, and further conversation.
So what stands out to you from all of this? What resonates most?
For me, it's the contrast between her public and private personas. In the public eye, she often appears reserved and controlled, but the photos in the memoir reveal a more complex individual, someone who's ambitious and driven, but also compassionate and family-oriented.
I agree. It's like she's constantly navigating between these different roles and expectations, and it makes me wonder how those experiences have shaped her views on life and her place in the world.
That's a great question, and it's one that we might be able to explore further by looking at how she's chosen to live her life since leaving the White House.
Okay, let's dive into that next. What can you tell us about Melania's life after the White House, based on the memoir excerpts and the photos we have? So we've seen glimpses of Melania's life after the White House. The memoir mentions her focusing on family, exploring new projects, and even hinting at some initiatives, especially in the area of foster care support. It seems like she's trying to define this next chapter for herself.
That's right. It's a transition period for her, moving from a highly public role back to a more private life. And as you mentioned, the memoir touches on her involvement with foster care. It seems like she's drawn to causes that resonate with her own experiences, perhaps thinking back to her own childhood and the importance of family.
It's interesting to see how she's channeling her energy into something new, using her platform to advocate for a cause she believes in. It also fits with that independent streak we've seen throughout her life, taking charge and charting her own course.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
But it's not all smooth sailing. The memoir also reveals some lingering tensions, especially when she discusses the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago.
Right, that was a huge story at the time, and she doesn't shy away from expressing her feelings about it.
Not at all. She describes the raid as a violation, a deeply unsettling experience. She even compares it to something out of her childhood in communist Slovenia, evoking that sense of being watched and intruded upon.
That's a powerful comparison. It makes you think about how that experience must have shaken her, bringing back memories of a system she clearly wasn't fond of. It seems like it reinforced her distrust of government overreach, something she mentions throughout the memoir.
It definitely seems to have had a profound impact on her. And it's interesting how she connects it back to her earlier experiences, highlighting the lasting influence of those formative years.
But even while expressing her personal feelings about the raid, she also defends Donald Trump's actions, saying he did nothing wrong. It's a reminder that her story is deeply intertwined with his, for better or worse.
It is. And it raises questions about how this event might shape her future involvement in politics. Will she become more vocal in her support for her husband? Will she retreat further from the public eye?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity to her story. And it makes me think about the challenges of maintaining a sense of individuality when you're so closely linked to a powerful figure like Donald Trump.
That's a great point. It's something she's navigated throughout their relationship, being a wife, a mother, a first lady, and now someone grappling with the aftermath of their time in the White House. It's a constant balancing act.
You were right. Looking at these sources together, the memoir excerpts and the photos, really paints a more complete picture of her. It's like we've gone beyond the headlines and caught a glimpse of the person behind the public persona.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the deep dive. We've provided you with the information and insights, and now it's up to you, the listener, to decide what you make of it all. What resonates with you? What questions do you still have?
This deep dive has definitely given me a new perspective on Melania Trump. I feel like I understand her journey a bit better, the challenges she's faced, the choices she's made, and the complexities of her story.
And hopefully it sparked your curiosity to learn even more. Maybe you'll seek out the full memoir or delve into some of the events we've discussed. The exploration doesn't end here.
That's right. The deep dive is just the beginning. It's a starting point for your own journey of discovery. So keep digging, keep questioning, and keep exploring.